Alright, time for another one of these little videos. I've been kind of putting together a few odds and ends on the cylinder head, and this should be kind of interesting. Maybe my last video about the cam gear was pretty standard, but this one's going to kind of fly in the face of accepted knowledge. And should be fun. Let's get to it. Is where does the energy go? So I'm back to this particular diagram, and let's not forget, most of your energy goes out your exhaust port. So you've got a little bit to the coolant, got some friction losses. Incidentally, if you look at this 5% friction, the only way you can drop that down to 5% is at wide open throttle. So you're absolutely blasting the heck out of the motor. Cruising down the highway in a 1745, you're not actually anywhere near full throttle, so your friction losses are going to go up as a portion of what's happening here. So it's just rough. As they say, it's typical. It just simply says typical. Okay, this is a mofoco 041 heads. You know, it'd be nice if I had some actual pictures of my heads. I don't really. I've got a little tiny bit of video on them, but not much. But anyway, this is what I've got, and I'm running. And you come down to here, and there's a bunch of statistics on it. Down here on the floor, I happen to have one of my old heads that I used to run. I've got one of my old manifolds that I used to run. I've even got a valve cover, because all these things would have at some point attached to the head. So let's take a look, not so much at that head, because there are some good pictures of this, but I'll describe this head relative to that. And you know, as I'm going through this thing, a lot of things I'm going to talk about is why did I pick this mofoco head versus some kind of a stock head. So let's look right now at valve springs. Certainly they are part of the head. Alright, these right here are heavy duty valve springs. No, you don't want to run heavy duties. If you do run high ratio rocker arms like 1.4s, people will tell you, oh, you're running 1.4s, you got to run heavy duties. No. If you have what they call valve spring interference. In other words, if you press it so far down that your valve springs essentially collapse and there's no space between the coils, then you would need to go to these guys. So the difference between this heavy duty valve spring and a stock valve spring is the number of windings as you go around. This has one less winding than a stock spring. So it allows you the thickness of one coil spring additional lift. Zinc. They're just bad for mileage. You don't want to run these things. Number two, we can run, it's all Valvetrain type stuff too. This has got chromoly retainers. Do not run chromoly retainers. You want to run like a titanium or aluminum. One of the things that you get with any energy transfer system, and so there's a change in energy. Anytime you've got a change in energy, there's going to be a loss of some of that energy. There's just no system is perfect as far as stuff like that goes. So if you can get by with a lighter weight retainer, and you can, they're not that expensive. You know, maybe you start off with these guys, but once your budget allows, pop these guys out and put on something lightweight. It'll save you a little bit of energy. I'm not saying you'll notice it, but it's definitely there. Yeah, I think the only other thing I can say about these things is that when you do install your stock springs, pay very close attention. Run progressive springs. These are not progressive. Every coil is uniformly spaced. That means they're not progressive. When you get a progressive spring, some of the coils will be tighter to each other. Take the tighter coils and put them down toward the head. Okay? I think that's it for the springs. There's not much else you can say. Okay, let's talk combustion chamber. Alright, all Volkswagen heads, including the aftermarket ones, pretty much have this kind of a shape to them. Don't rethink the wheel. It is what it is. It's what you need. Don't go semi-hemi. The only thing you've got to do with these things is one of the things that I don't have. One of the tools I do not have is one of those head chamber CC tools. And before I build my 2-liter, I will be getting one of those tools. I made a mistake with my 1745. I misread Mofoco's website, and I thought I was buying a head with a 53 cc combustion chamber. Turns out those Mofoco heads are 55 cc's, which means my compression, which I thought was 8.4 to 1, is actually about 8.2 to 1. So I am very close compression-wise to that CB Performance Hot VW's magazine motor. Very close. Okay, let's talk fins. We've got a bunch of fins on the stock head. They're everywhere. There's airflow going everywhere. if you buy an aftermarket head like the Mofoco, he puts an awful lot of extra metal in here. And when you put the extra metal in, things like the air passage that goes down through all these little holes down through here. There's air passages right here underneath the spring, not the springs, but underneath your spark plug. These holes on the Mofoco get filled up. He's got a lot of beef in that head, so these things are going to fill up. And I know you're going to be concerned about, well, you know, it's an aftermarket head, and the holes are filled up. It's not going to flow enough air to cool. I've been living with that head for a while, and that head doesn't appear to run hot. I think part of the reasons why it doesn't run hot is that it does actually have a lot of beef around the combustion chamber. And that allows the heat to get soaked up. It allows the heat to spread. You know, you don't, heat's like a fluid. It takes a while to flow from one place to another. And it will flow faster if you got a big passage for it to go through, which is what happens when you've got a lot of beef around the combustion chamber. So he's got a lot of beef around the combustion chamber. Allows the heat to flow. His fins are shaped slightly different. These are essentially a flat plate. His fins are slightly fatter down at the bottom than they are at the top. The fatness at the bottom, again, allows the heat to flow into the fin. So although you don't have the air passages down in here, you do have, I believe, a better flow into the fins that will be receiving air. So again, it's a mileage motor. They're efficient. They don't generate a lot of waste heat. So I think with that kind of an airflow, you can get away with something like a slightly plugged up, you know, head like what you got. In addition to that, heat's actually your friend as far as making mileage goes. If you looked at that that chart about waste heat, and 30% goes to waste heat, the hotter your stuff gets, the less the temperature differential. The less the temperature differential, the less heat flows out of your system. You make more power. It's one of the advantages that you get with an air-cooled motor. Because we operate higher, we have the potential to have less temperature differential, less heat loss to cooling. So, anyway, well, that's about it for the fins. Alright, I got one other piece as far as the build type for the Mofoco head. Alright, when I first got those Mofoco heads, I put this head, you know, I put this guy in one hand, I put the Mofoco head in the other hand, and the Mofoco head is considerably heavier than this. This is quite heavy. I mean, I could curl this and probably build up my biceps. It's that heavy. But the Mofoco is even heavier. So what you get with all that mass, let's take a look. Imagine that you've got a motor. I got a head over here. I've got a head over on the other side, somewhere over there by that manifold. And in the middle, I've got a crankshaft. Of course, it's attached to the pistons, and I'm idling. And you know that these things with the dual single carbs, they don't idle very well. So it sits there and it goes rock, 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 rock. In order to dampen the rocking, if I put a big ass mass over here and another big mass over there, and it tries to rock against that big mass, well, the amplitude of the rocking is diminished. So that's one of the reasons why I picked that big friggin' heavy head, is because I know that my motor is going to idle poorly with these manifolds. Not the manifolds, but with the single dual carbs. It's just the nature of the game. All right, another thing that you get with a big heavy head, he's got a lot of mass sitting right around the combustion chamber. One right there and one right there. Now he's got mass for the ports, but he's also added mass around the combustion chambers. And yes, it helps on the vibration, but there's another small side effect that you probably haven't thought about, in that you know, one of the reasons why water-cooled cars are quiet is that around their cylinders, they got all this mass for the water passages. They've also got water passages up in here. So there's mass, there's lots of metal, there's water. When you put an extra pile of metal around the combustion chamber in one of these things, it deadens the sound. So when the spark goes pop and this thing goes kaboom, you get less noise. My heads, that's the quietest motor I've ever built. Those big friggin' massive heads, they dampen the noise. It's not just quiet because I've got hydraulic lifters. It's quiet because my Mofoco head, tons of mass, dampens the sound. Depending on your build size, you definitely want to start with a combustion chamber that's in the ballpark for what you want. Like if you're going to a downsized mileage motor, you'd want to go with a more stockish sized chamber. And if you got a bigger motor, like a 1745, you might want to go to a slightly bigger combustion chamber. Like I did, like that 55. But again, I went with the bigger head for modifiability. Like maybe in the future we decide to pull it apart, maybe we stick in some slip ins or something like that, and we juice it from a 1745 up to about like an 1807 or something like that. We've got a head that we can do that with and not have to touch anything. It'll just be a direct bolt in, and off we go. Alright, let's flip this guy back around, back over to the intake valve again here real quick. Alright, here's something that I've kind of realized as I was playing around with any number of head configurations decades ago. A bigger intake valve has a more pleasant and pleasing intake note. You know, my motor is very quiet, you know, for a Volkswagen motor, but you do hear the intake, and a bigger valve intake produces a more pleasing, deeper, mellower sound. I kind of like it. So I don't need the 39mm intake. One of the reasons why I did it was kind of from a vanity standpoint. It has a better sound. It doesn't make mileage. I mean, it's just a sound. It sounds better. Oh, let's see. Something else that people do to these things is, from time to time, they may install some kind of a coating of some sort, either inside the combustion chamber or in the ports. In general, the idea being that you're trying to install a barrier to heat transfer, and all I can say is take a lesson from the automotive manufacturers, and if it was as simple as coating a combustion chamber, the auto manufacturers would do it, but they don't. I think it's a durability issue. I think if you coat that stuff, eventually it flakes, cracks off, or just gets covered with carbon. Look at it, carbon, it's going to get covered. Not a real good reason to do it. So I think they're marginal, they're fairly expensive. If you want to play with them, fantastic. I would recommend against it. Save your money, do something else with it. It is that page. Okay, this is the CB head. Now remember, if you've read their article, you know that their head was the Mexican head. So these Mexican heads have, what do they have? 33mm intake valves. I believe they have a 32mm exhaust valve. And here's something else that they did for this build. They installed shorter intake guides. This is also what you get with the mofoco heads. Quality 3-angle valve job. You get that with the mofoco head. Lightweight titanium retainers. Now, I did not get that with my mofoco heads, but I already had those on my car from back when I was running a 1415. Let's take a look at their torque curve. Okay, this is back to the mileage motor, and this is their dyno test for their mileage motor. And down here, 2,500 RPM, this is their peak torque. And nobody builds a cam that has peak torque down at 2,500 RPMs. That's just crazy. But anyway, their peak torque just has basically a linear fall off. What this is basically telling you is that the intake port that they've got on that motor is being overwhelmed. It's just flat out not a large enough intake port for a 1745 and that particular cam that they've got. But it works fantastic. I mean, this is amazing. This is just like so far beyond what I've got. But, you know, pat downs, these guys at Secret Performance, they had budget. So you say, yeah, but we're talking mileage. Yes, I love mileage. But as I've said before, their mileage for this motor was, if I can find it, it's not the one I want, it's not that one, it's this one. Alright, so their mileage again was 29.9. This is their second mileage run, so pretty much anything that they've done after this involves a freeway flyer transmission, at which point you can't really compare what they did to what I've got. But this is the last mileage reading that they got before they threw in the freeway flyer. And so they've got those heads, I've got my heads. They've got a teeny tiny intake valve, I've got a big intake valve, and their teeny tiny intake valve, and all the work that Pat Downs did to that motor, including dyno testing it. I've never dyno tested mine. They netted 29.9, and I'm at about 30.3. So I'm a little bit past what they are, and I've got a big intake valve. So the big intake valve isn't a detriment. One of the things that they now know, there's been research, fairly recent research, that indicates, let me find it. Let's go back to this one. Okay, back here. See this coolant loss here? This 30%? If you have too much swirl and tumble in your combustion chamber, you actually increase coolant losses. Like I say, it's once you have enough swirl and tumble, you don't need to go beyond it. And I have no doubt that I've got enough swirl and tumble, even with my 39mm intake valve. One of the reasons why I believe that is, we come back over here, and now I know you're saying, let's get back to the single port thing again. You're thinking single port, it's big for torque and stuff like that, low end grunt. Let's take a look real quick at one of my videos. Okay, this is a screenshot from one of my videos, right? Look at where my tack is. That's 3,300 RPMs. I'm doing between 65 and 70 miles an hour right here. And this is where I'm driving all the time. And I've got a 1973 transmission. That transmission contains the tallest gearing that you could get from the factory in any American style VW. I don't know if they did it over in Europe differently, or they did it differently in any of the like Mexican Beetles or Brazilians, but for an American Beetle, it has the tallest gearing. And that's screaming. This is absolutely screaming. This isn't down here in the low end torque type stuff. This is up towards my RPM limit. Look, I'm much closer to my RPM limit than I am to any low end grunt stuff. So you've run yourself at freeway speeds out of where the single port's strong point is, which is low end grunt. And again, it doesn't matter about low end grunt. What matters is you've got part throttle and can I burn my fuel efficiency. And that intake port doesn't really help you. I've got one other piece of evidence as to why that intake valve is not really helping you. Let's see if I can find it. It is this one. Okay, as those of you who read this entire article, you know that at some point in time, after they put on the freeway flyer, they went to Berg and they got something called a jetivator. They plugged in their jetivator and they got a 10% increase in mileage. So they've got this teeny tiny intake valve, which should be getting them huge amounts of mileage. There should be nothing left. They shouldn't be able to do anything to this thing to get more mileage. They throw in a jetivator and bang, just like that, they've got a 10% increase in mileage. Those teeny tiny valves, it's not magic. It's a whole system. The entire system has to work. And they've got some fantastic stuff, but I'm telling you that they could have gotten the same mileage and even more horsepower out of that motor if they picked a different head. Alright, here's something else you single porter guys have to think about. If you're going to run some kind of a dual carb setup, you're going to be running a manifold that's similar to this. This happens to be a CB Performance manifold. You take your CB Performance manifold, you drop it on like that, you put a bolt on that side, you can put a nut on this side and a nut on that side, you're going to torque it down, you're going to think you're all set, and the next thing you know, you got a vacuum leak down here. It's going to sit there at a traffic light going and then you take it home and you tighten it up again and you get it to go away and you drive for a week and the next thing you know, these things are next to impossible to get to seal. Even if you do get them to seal, eventually, and this is probably the third or fourth set of manifolds that I have, see that little arm right there that you have to bolt onto? They snap off, so they do break. Eventually you'll get frustrated with all that leaking, you'll tighten it down to the point that you snap that little arm off right there. That's a problem you don't have with the dual ports. The dual port is just so stable. It's stable, it's solid, it never leaks. Maybe it's just an issue with dual single barrels. Maybe if you had a center mount, the center mounts are probably easier to deal with. But that is a pain in the butt to get attached to this and have it not leak. Alright, okay, one of the things you may want to do, should you build one of your mileage motors, and you've got a limited budget right now, maybe you went to a swap meet, or like me, you just simply had an absolutely ancient set of dual single barrels laying around, and you're putting together your new build, and you pick your single ports, and next thing you know, you've got a budget for dual 2 barrels. Help perform the single barrels. Not just for power, but they'll idle better, and they'll make as good or better mileage too. They're a fantastic way of doing it. But if you've gone with single ports, you cannot upgrade. There's no upgrading as far as that goes. So congratulations for making it all the way through 19 minutes of video on heads. A lot of that stuff was about just heads in general, because there really isn't that much to say about heads and mileage. Just make it appropriately sized, and it'll work. It doesn't make that big a difference. On the other hand, yeah, I do recommend a dual port. Yeah, the only way I'd go single port is if I had a really tiny motor. Thanks for watching.